The Art of Unowned Mind. Why you must stop begging for approval. Before the eyes are fully open, there is the hum of the phone, the distant motorbikes, the soft pressure in the chest, the mind scanning for signs. Did I say something wrong yesterday? Did they notice my mistake? Am I enough, or am I already being quietly reduced in someone else's mind? This is how modern life begins for many of us, not with presence, but with surveillance. We do not merely live our day, we stand outside ourselves, holding a clipboard, waiting for imaginary judges to speak. And because this fear is so ordinary, so familiar, we mistake it for truth. We call it caution, modesty, professionalism, humility, maturity, but underneath those respectable words, something more fragile is happening. We are handing the keys to our nervous system to other people's faces. A raised eyebrow can alter our mood. A cold message can collapse our confidence. Silence can feel like exile. Praise can feel like oxygen. Criticism can feel like identity death. We are not only afraid of being judged, we are often afraid of being made small in our own eyes because someone else looked at us with disapproval. The Buddha pointed directly at this kind of suffering with a clarity that still feels unsettling. Pain arrives, that is part of being alive. But then the mind adds a second wound. The story, the shame, the obsession, the self-hatred, the endless replay. That second arrow is optional, yet most of us shoot it into ourselves again and again. Fear of judgment lives in that second arrow. Someone's opinion may be one moment of discomfort, our mind turns it into a verdict on our worth, our future, our belonging, our right to exist confidently in the world. Picture a person walking through a crowded city with a glass house strapped to their back. Every glance seems able to crack it. Every comment seems able to shatter it. They are not just trying to be good, they are trying to become unbreakable through approval. But approval is unstable ground. One person adores us, another misunderstands us, a third forgets us, a fourth envies us, and a fifth has a bad day and says something sharp. If we have built our inner home on the shifting opinions of others, we will spend our lives moving furniture during earthquakes. And yet, this fear did not begin in adulthood. Long before we had words like self-esteem or social anxiety, we learned a simple rule. Safety follows acceptance. As children, we watched faces carefully. A parent's mood could mean warmth or withdrawal. A teacher's praise could mean visibility. A teacher's disappointment could mean shame. Later, peers taught us the cost of standing out. So we became attentive, adaptive, and sometimes brilliant at reading the room. The gift became the trap. Sensitivity turned into self-erasure. Awareness of others turned into dependence on others. What makes this especially painful is that the body believes the story. The shoulders rise before the mind has finished its sentence. The jaw clamps shut. The throat tightens as though words must pass through a narrow gate. The breath becomes shallow and high in the chest. The stomach hardens. The eyes scan too quickly, trying to measure every reaction. Even when no one is speaking, the body acts as if a tribunal is underway. The nervous system has mistaken social discomfort for danger, and once that mistake becomes habitual, it begins to feel like personality rather than conditioning. We begin to live as if judgment itself were a weapon pointed at us. There is a terrible irony in that. The more we fear judgment, the more we become organized around it. We edit our words before they are spoken. We abandon our tastes before they are known. We become fluent in anticipated embarrassment. We choose careers, relationships, clothes, opinions, and even spiritual practices in order to appear acceptable. At some point, the question is no longer what is true, but what will be tolerated. That is not freedom. That is a negotiated captivity. And still, many of us think the solution is to become more impressive. We believe that if we are smarter, prettier, richer, calmer, more articulate, more useful, more spiritually polished, then judgment will lose its power. But this is the logic of a prisoner decorating the cell. The fear does not end when the audience approves, because the real audience has become internal. Even when no one is looking, we are still being watched by an invisible panel inside the skull. That panel is made of memory, comparison, old humiliation, and borrowed standards. It speaks with the voices of people who may no longer be present, yet remain strangely authoritative. So let us look carefully at what is actually happening. A person says, "I don't care what people think," but their body disagrees. Their pulse spikes when they post online. They rehearse sentences before sending a message. They feel relief when someone smiles and shame when someone turns away too quickly. They say they are independent, yet their inner stability rises and falls with the weather of other people's opinions. This is not weakness in a moral sense, it is an unexamined system of dependence. And because it is unexamined, it rules them from beneath consciousness. Some people express this fear through perfectionism. They over-prepare, overwork, and over-explain. Others express it through withdrawal. They remain quiet, agreeable, and invisible, hoping invisibility will prevent criticism. Others become performers. They create a personality designed to win applause, then resent everyone for applauding the mask instead of the self. Different strategies, same core wound. Please do not see me clearly, because if you do, you may reject me. This fear has a body. You can see it in the slight lift of the chin that hides vulnerability. You can hear it in the overfast speech that tries to outrun interruption. You can feel it in the clenched pelvic floor, the rigid back, the frozen hands, the forced laugh. Some people carry it as a permanent brightness in the face, the kind that says, "I am fine," while every muscle underneath is negotiating danger. Others carry it as numbness. They seem detached, but their detachment is often just a locked door. The mind withdrew because the world felt too sharp. And when this fear becomes chronic, the person does something heartbreaking. They begin to live as if their own view of themselves does not count until it has been confirmed from outside. That is the essence of handing over psychological life and death power to others' perspectives. Not just "I value feedback," which can be healthy. Not just "I want to improve," which can be wise, but tell me who I am. Tell me whether I am worthy. Tell me whether I am safe to feel good about myself. This is where the wound deepens, because no crowd can give a stable answer to a question that only inner clarity can resolve. And if a person waits for the world to stop judging, they will wait forever. There will always be a stranger, a critic, a rival, a family member, an algorithm, a memory, or a phantom audience ready to supply some new doubt. The Buddhist teaching is not that other people's opinions never matter. It is that they must not be allowed to govern the architecture of the mind. A useful insult is still an insult. A wise critique is still a critique, but neither has the right to become an all-day sentence about your existence. The problem is not the existence of judgment. The problem is the surrender of sovereignty. When the mind says, "Their view has the power to define me," the suffering is no longer merely social, it becomes existential. Now we arrive at the first hidden illusion, that being judged means being seen. Not true, often. Being judged means being reduced. Someone sees only a fragment and calls it the whole. Someone projects their fear, envy, disappointment, or need onto us and calls it truth. Someone mistakes their mood for our value. Someone looks through the lens of their own pain and assumes the image is real. If we take that as identity, we are not living in relationship with others, we are living inside their distortions. That is a severe loss of interior freedom. The second illusion is that if many people think something, it must be true. Crowds have never guaranteed clarity. Noise is not wisdom. Repetition is not truth. Social agreement can be wildly mistaken, and history is full of examples where people were punished for being early to the truth. Yet the fear of judgment seduces us into treating popularity as reality. We become willing to betray our own perception to avoid discomfort. We would rather be falsely accepted than honestly misunderstood. But false acceptance is just delayed betrayal. The third illusion is the most intimate, that our worth must be constantly earned. This one is especially cruel because it turns life into an endless audition. We act, perform, apologize, improve, and perform again. We never arrive, we never belong, we never get to rest inside being. Instead, we live inside proving. And proving is exhausting because it has no finish line. Even success merely resets the standard. The mind says, "Good, but now do it again, and better, and without flaws, and without being seen as needy." A person living like this is not cultivating excellence, they are feeding an internal economy of fear. At this point, we need to go deeper into the anatomy of the fear itself. Imagine several lives, each showing a different face of the same wound. There is the achiever, whose resume is immaculate and whose sleep is not. They fear judgment so deeply that every task becomes proof of survival. A small criticism from a manager can ruin an entire weekend. They can outwork anyone, but they cannot outpace the feeling that one misstep will expose them as fraudulent. Their shoulders live near their ears. Their breath is nearly always interrupted. They keep moving because stillness would let the fear catch them. There is the peacemaker who says yes when they mean no. They dread its approval so much that they become fluent in self-abandonment. They smile through resentment. They agree while tightening inside. Their body learns to suppress truth in exchange for belonging. Over time, they lose the ability to notice what they actually want because their desire has been trained into silence. The cost is subtle, then severe. They are liked, but not known. There is the performer, who curates identity with extraordinary intelligence. They can enter any room and become what the room rewards. They are witty here, humble there, competent elsewhere, vulnerable on cue, strong on cue, spiritual on cue. They are not fake in a simple sense, they are adaptive to the point of disappearance. Their fear is not that they will fail a performance, but that performance is the only self they can reliably offer. There is the avoider, who stays small to avoid the sting of evaluation. They do not apply, speak up, ask, pitch, publish, or confess. Their life is full of unfinished beginnings. They call it caution. But underneath is the belief that exposure equals humiliation. So the body shrinks before the world has a chance to respond. The possibility of judgment becomes more powerful than the reality of living. And there is the overthinker, who can turn one facial expression into 1,000 possible meanings. They do not merely feel judged, they reconstruct the entire courtroom in their head. They are interrogator, defendant, witness, and prosecutor all at once. Their mind circles the same event seeking certainty. But certainty is impossible, because the event was never about complete truth. It was only ever a human moment, full of ambiguity. Notice how each archetype carries the fear in the muscles. The achiever's neck is rigid from staying prepared. The peacemaker's chest is compressed from holding back. The performer's face is overactive from constant modulation. The avoider's posture contracts inward. The overthinker's forehead and eyes become overworked from scanning. These are not just habits of personality. They are repeated stress patterns, and over time they become a kind of bodily biography. The fear of judgment also affects the breath in a very specific way. When we imagine being evaluated, the breath often becomes shallow and segmented. We no longer breathe into the lower belly with ease. We breathe as though we might need to interrupt ourselves at any moment. This creates a loop. Shallow breath supports threat perception, and threat perception produces more shallow breath. The body then confirms what the mind already fears. Something is wrong. But what is wrong is not the existence of judgment. What is wrong is the nervous system's inability to remain spacious in its presence. This is why such fear can feel humiliating. People say, just don't care. They do not understand that the body has already learned a lesson. We are not dealing with a slogan. We are dealing with a conditioned state, and conditioned states are changed by repetition, attention, and truth, not by shame. The deepest injury, however, is not social. It is self-relational. Fear of judgment is often a wound in our relationship to ourselves, made visible through other people. We are not merely scared that others will disapprove. We are scared that their disapproval will confirm what we already suspect in private. This is why criticism can sting so much. It does not land on blank ground. It lands on old shame. The comment is small, the injury is ancient. The body reacts as if the present moment contains the original abandonment all over again. That is the second arrow at work. The first arrow may be a sharp comment, a mistake, a missed opportunity, a public awkwardness, or a face that did not light up when we hoped it would. The second arrow is the mind's response. This proves I am incompetent. Everyone can see it. I will never recover. I should have been better. I knew I was not enough. The Buddha's insight is devastatingly practical here. The event and the suffering we add to it are not the same thing. Now let us examine the illusion of the audience. Much of the fear of judgment survives because the audience is not real in the way we think it is. The mind constructs a composite crowd from fragments of old authority figures, peers, strangers, and imagined future critics. This crowd has no single face, but it has immense power. It is made of memory. It changes shape depending on our mood. It can be kinder in 1 hour and crueler in the next. Yet we bow to it as though it were an external god. In Buddhist language, this is attachment to views in its most painful form. We cling to the view that others see us accurately. We cling to the view that their opinion determines our value. We cling to the view that our self must be defended, improved, or hidden at all costs. But views are not the same as truth. They are conditioned, partial, and impermanence. When we grip them, they grip us back to understand this more deeply. Think of the body as a shoreline. Every judgment from outside is a wave. Some waves are small and vanish. Some are stronger and leave a mark. But the fear of judgment makes us behave as if every wave is a tsunami. We tense before impact. We anticipate collapse. We build a life around avoiding wetness. Yet the shoreline is not harmed by being touched by the sea. What harms us is the belief that one wave defines the coast. This is where the Buddha's teaching becomes a tool of liberation rather than doctrine. He does not ask us to become indifferent. Indifference is merely another kind of armor. He asks us to see clearly, to see that the first hurt is already enough, to see that the mind's second attack is where suffering multiplies, to see that we do not need to keep punishing ourselves for being human, to see that other people's perceptions are events, not verdicts, to see that the self we defend so fiercely is itself a changing process, not a fixed object. And once we see this, practice becomes possible. Not abstract practice, not decorative practice, not the practice of looking serene while secretly panicking. Real practice begins in the body and moves through daily life. First, we learn to notice the instant the body braces before imagined judgment. The shoulders rise, the breath shorts. The stomach tightens. The face prepares a mask. This moment matters because it is the doorway. If we can recognize the first tightening, we can interrupt the spiral before it becomes identity. Then we learn to pause. A pause is revolutionary when the mind expects immediate defense. In that pause, we name what is happening simply and honestly. Fear is here. Tightness is here. The urge to impress is here. The wish to disappear is here. Naming does not defeat the fear, but it stops us from becoming entirely possessed by it. We are no longer only the scared person. We are the one who knows the scared person is present. This is a different architecture of consciousness. The old structure said, I am what they think. The new structure says they are having a view and I am having a response, but neither one owns my being. That shift is small in words and enormous in life. It restores the space in which choice can appear. Breath then becomes the bridge. When the mind is trapped in social threat, we bring attention to the exhale, not to force calm, but to teach the nervous system that there is room. Longer exhalation tells the body that it does not need to prepare for battle. We are not trying to become a statue. We are reminding a frightened organism that it is not being chased. Over time, the breath becomes less like a gasp and more like a ground. We can also work directly with the throat and jaw, because judgment fear often lives there. The jaw clenches to hold back words. The throat tightens to prevent vulnerability, so, intentionally, we soften the jaw, let the tongue rest, and allow the throat to be less defended. This is not merely relaxation, it is a message to the entire system. I do not need to hide my existence to deserve safety. The body may not believe this immediately, but it can learn by repeated exposure to gentleness. Then comes the hardest practice, exposure to being imperfect in public. Not recklessly, not without wisdom, but intentionally. Say the honest sentence without polishing it to death. Wear the comfortable thing that does not win approval. Ask the question that may reveal ignorance. Set the boundary that may disappoint someone. Admit the mistake without making it into a public execution. Each small act teaches the body that survival does not depend on flawless performance. Each one loosens the spell that says judgment equals annihilation. This is where the story of the mirror becomes useful. Imagine a mirror covered in dust. The dust is not the mirror's identity, but it distorts everything reflected. The fear of judgment is like that dust. It makes us see ourselves through grime, then assume the grime is our face. Practice is not about smashing the mirror or forcing it to smile. Practice is about cleaning it again and again with patience. The mirror never needed to become something else. It only needed to be cleared enough to reflect without distortion. And what cleans it? Honest observation, compassionate discipline, repeated refusal to worship every passing opinion. There is also a moral dimension here. Fear of judgment often drives us to become dishonest in subtle ways. We exaggerate success. We hide confusion. We curate pain into something more acceptable. We tell partial truths because full truth feels risky. but a life built on evasion becomes internally expensive. The split between appearance and reality grows, and the person begins to distrust their own speech. Therefore, one of the most healing practices is to tell the truth in doses that are courageous but bearable. Truth does something remarkable. It reduces the need for performance. It also reduces shame because shame feeds on concealment. Once we can say, "I am afraid of being seen as inadequate," the fear loses some of its shadow power. It becomes a feeling rather than a fate. Another practice is to distinguish feedback from identity. Feedback says this action could improve. Identity says, I am fundamentally defective. The first is useful, the second is a prison. When someone criticizes a behavior, we can choose to examine it without converting it into self-condemnation. This is one of the most mature forms of inner freedom, the ability to learn without self-destruction. We also need to confront comparison, because comparison is one of the engines of judgment fear. When we compare ourselves to others, we usually compare our private uncertainty to their public display. We compare our unfinished draft to their edited result. We compare our hidden insecurities to their polished surface. Then we call the resulting pain evidence. It is not evidence. It is distorted measurement. The Buddhist path invites us out of this hallucination by returning us to direct experience. What is happening in my body? What is true in this moment? What needs care, not applause? There is a subtle shift when we stop asking, "How do I appear?" and begin asking, "What is the wise response here?" That question is stronger than approval seeking because it moves us from identity management to reality engagement. It pulls attention from image toward action. It asks not whether we can be admired, but whether we can be sincere, stable, and useful. Over time, this reorients the entire personality. The nervous system no longer spends all its energy on self-presentation. It begins to spend energy on presence. And presence is what judgment fear has always been trying to prevent. Because if we are truly present, we may discover that many of the things we feared were not happening. May see that someone else's harshness was about their pain, that a silence was ordinary, not condemning, that a mistake was survivable, that embarrassment passes, that we can be seen and remain intact. This is not fantasy. It is repeated experience. The body learns through lived evidence. Still, practice must be honest about setbacks. There will be days when the old fear returns with force. A message will sting. A room will feel charged. A remembered humiliation will rise from nowhere and take over the afternoon. On those days, the goal is not victory. The goal is not to prove we are beyond fear. The goal is to stop adding the second arrow, to say, "This hurts not. This proves I am unworthy to feel the wave," without building an identity from its shape. This is the true art of inner discipline, not rigid control, not emotional suppression, not spiritual posing, but the steady refusal to abandon oneself when discomfort appears. When judgment fear rises, we do not collapse into it, and we do not attack ourselves for having it. We remain. We breathe. We notice. We allow the body to complete a stress response without converting it into a life sentence. The most liberating insight is that other people's views cannot touch the deepest layer of being unless we hand them the knife. They can misread us, they can undervalue us, they can misunderstand us completely, but only our own mind can decide whether their vision becomes our prison. This is why the Buddha's teaching on the second arrow is so essential. It returns agency to the place where suffering can actually be interrupted. There is a moment in deep practice when the old equation breaks. Approval no longer feels like salvation. Disapproval no longer feels like exile. Praise can be appreciated without dependence. Criticism can be examined without collapse. The body still registers social nuance, but it no longer turns every nuance into emergency. We begin to live from the center rather than from the edge. The face softens, the throat opens, the breath descends, the shoulders settle. There is less performing, more being. In that state, people often become kinder, not because they are trying harder to be liked, but because fear is no longer steering the wheel. A person no longer ruled by judgment. Fear can listen more deeply. They can speak more cleanly. They can disagree without panic. They can receive correction without humiliation. They can love without bargaining for constant reassurance. They can do difficult work without needing every step to be applauded. They are no longer trying to win existence. They are inhabiting it. And this changes everything. Relationships become less transactional. Creativity becomes less self-protective. Work becomes less theatrical. Rest becomes possible because the mind is not constantly preparing for trial. There is room for silence. There is room for uncertainty. There is room for being incomplete without panic. This is a very different life from the one organized around the crowd's imagined gaze. If we wanted a simple test, it would be this: can I remain myself when someone misunderstands me? Not perfectly, not instantly, but increasingly. Can I tolerate the gap between who I am and who they think I am without rushing to self-betrayal? Can I let their view remain theirs? Can I keep my spine while remaining warm? These are not small questions. They are the architecture of freedom. When the Buddha said the second arrow is optional, he was not minimizing pain. He was protecting dignity. Pain will happen. Misunderstanding will happen. Judgment will happen. But the extra cruelty we add: shame, self-contempt, obsession, identity collapse is not required. And because it is not required, it can be released little by little through clarity and practice. There is a kind of peace that comes not from being universally approved, but from being internally unowned. You are seen but not captured, heard but not absorbed, evaluated but not defined. This peace is not a trance, it is a wakeful stability. It does not mean the heart stops caring. It means the heart stops kneeling before every passing opinion. The mind becomes less like a courtroom and more like a clear sky. Thoughts and judgments still move through, but they no longer own the weather. And when that happens, the world does not necessarily become softer. People may still be rude, confused, distracted, and unfair, but your relationship to their noise changes. You stop treating every reaction as a referendum on your being. You begin to recognize the precious fact that your inner life does not have to be auctioned to the loudest voice in the room. That is the quiet miracle of this teaching. Not invulnerability, but integrity. Not perfection, but freedom from compulsive self-condemnation. Not the elimination of judgment, but the end of its tyranny. Not an armored life, but a life that can be touched without being owned. To understand how deep this unowned life can go, we must look at the mechanics of identity building. The human mind is an architect of ghosts. From the moment we step into the social arena, we begin building a character. This character is designed to navigate the specific climate of our home, our school, our culture. If the climate is cold, the character learns to be bright and self-contained to generate warmth. If the climate is chaotic, the character learns to be perfectly orderly to prevent explosions. We mistake this protective armor for our actual flesh and blood. The tragedy of the armor is that it requires constant maintenance. Every time we walk into a room, we must check for loose bolts, polished surfaces, and dented sections. We ask our friends, our partners, and our colleagues to inspect the armor, hoping they will say it looks strong, beautiful, and flawless. But when they point out a crack, we do not see it as feedback on the metal. We feel as if our very heart has been pierced. The Buddha's radical diagnosis is that the armor itself is an illusion. There is no solid thing inside that needs defending. There is only a shifting river of awareness, a constant flow of thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and sensations. When you realize that you are the river and not the banks, the rocks, or the leaves floating on the surface, the fear of judgment changes its nature. A wave cannot hurt a river. A rock cannot stop the water from moving. The water simply flows around it, takes its shape for a moment, and continues its journey toward the ocean. Think of how much energy is reclaimed when we stop defending a character that does not exist. We spend decades trying to protect a reputation, a self-image, a narrative of who we are. We want to be known as the reliable one, the brilliant one, the spiritual one, the resilient one. This narrative becomes a heavy trunk we drag through airports, refusing to leave it behind even when it costs us our health, our joy, and our sanity. What happens if you leave the trunk on the carousel? At first, there is panic. The mind feels naked, exposed, completely undefined. If I am not the successful professional, the perfect parent, the enlightened practitioner, then who am I? The silence that follows that question is terrifying to the ego. But it is the exact place where true healing begins. In that emptiness, you discover that you do not need a label to breathe. You do not need a definition to feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. You do not need permission from a panel of onlookers to occupy space on this earth. Let us look closely at the physical sensation of that emptiness. When the mind drops its definitions, the body responds immediately. The microtensions in the forehead begin to dissolve. The tiny muscles around the eyes, which spend all day scanning faces for approval or threat, finally rest. The root of the tongue relaxes. The collarbones widen, creating more room for the lungs to expand sideways rather than upward. This is the physiological signature of non-attachment. It is not coldness or detachment. It is the space required for true intimacy with the present moment. When we live from this space, our relationship with other people shifts from consumption to communion. When you need someone's approval, you are consuming them. You are using their smile as a drug to soothe your internal anxiety. You are using their validation to fill a void that you refuse to look at directly. This turns every relationship into a covert transaction. I will show you my best self. I will say what you want to hear. I will compress my truth, and in return you must promise never to think badly of me. This transaction is inherently unstable because people are unpredictable. They change their minds, they get tired, they project their own unresolved parental trauma onto us. They become distracted by their own fears. When the transaction fails, we feel betrayed. We blame them for being inconsistent, cruel, or unperceptive. But the mistake was ours. We tried to build a sanctuary inside a house made of playing cards. The alternative is not to isolate ourselves or to treat others with cold indifference. The alternative is to step onto the solid ground of your own direct experience. When someone criticizes you, can you look at the criticism with the curiosity of a scientist? Is there truth in it? If there is truth, thank them for showing you a blind spot. If there is no truth, if it is merely their own confusion, anger, or pain speaking, can you let it pass through the sky of your mind like an old plastic bag caught in the wind? A clear sky does not fight the bag. It does not argue with it. It does not try to prove it shouldn't be there. It simply provides the space for it to float by until it lands somewhere else. This requires a profound training in staying with discomfort. Most of us are addicted to immediate emotional relief. The moment we feel the sting of judgment, we want to explain ourselves, defend our actions, or attack the person who judged us. This reaction is entirely automatic, driven by the primitive brain which equates social rejection with physical death. In ancestral times, being cast out of the tribe meant freezing or starving alone in the wilderness. The nervous system remembers this. It treats an unfollow, a critical comment, or a cold look from a boss as if it were a pack of wolves encircling the campfire. But you are not in the ancient wilderness anymore. You are sitting in a room, breathing, safe. A critical comment cannot alter the composition of your blood unless you allow your mind to flood your system with cortisol through the stories you tell yourself. The pack of wolves is entirely made of language. It is made of adjectives, nouns, verbs, and punctuation marks. When you see through the linguistic nature of the threat, the fear begins to lose its teeth. Let us sit with the sensation of being judged without reacting. Imagine a moment where someone has completely misunderstood your intentions. They have called you selfish, incompetent, or insincere. Feel the immediate rush of heat in the chest. Feel the throat closing up, the urge to speak, to correct the record, to launch a counteroffensive now. Do nothing. Do not say a word. Do not write a defensive email. Do not replay the argument in your head to find the perfect witty comeback. Just sit on the cushion or stand on the floor and feel the energy of that discomfort moving through your body. It feels like fire, like tightness, like an electrical current vibrating through the limbs. If you do not feed it with more thoughts, if you do not throw the dry wood of your stories onto that fire, what happens to it? It changes. It always changes. This is the truth of impermanence, Votung. No emotional state can maintain its peak intensity without the active cooperation of the thinking mind. If you simply watch the physical sensations with a kind, steady attention, the fire will eventually exhaust its fuel. It will turn into warmth, then into a dull ache, then into a spacious stillness. And in that stillness you will realize something extraordinary. The wave hit the shoreline, the shore got wet, and yet the land did not dissolve. You are still here. This is the birth of true confidence. It is not the confidence of a person who never fails, never makes mistakes, and never gets criticized. That is an artificial, fragile confidence built on performance. True confidence is the knowledge that you can fail. You can be completely misunderstood. You can be rejected by the entire room. and your capacity to breathe, feel, and love will remain completely undamaged. You become less like a fragile vase that shatters upon impact and more like a massive bell. When the bell is struck with a hammer, it does not break, it simply produces a deep resonant sound that fills the valley and then fades into silence. Let us bring this back to the archetype of the overthinker. The overthinker believes that if they can anticipate every possible reaction, they can prevent pain. They run simulations in their head before every meeting, every dinner party, every difficult conversation. If they say A, I will say B. If they look at me like C, I will adjust my posture to D. This is an enormous waste of cognitive resources. It is like running a supercomputer 24 hours a day to prevent a single leaf from falling on the roof. The antidote to overthinking is not to try to stop thinking. That is just another performance, another attempt to be a good meditator. The antidote is to anchor the attention so deeply in the physical body that the mind has no room to build its courtrooms. When you are fully aware of the contact between your feet and the floor, when you can feel the exact texture of your clothes against your skin, when you can hear the ambient sounds of the room without labeling them as good or bad, the imaginary audience dissolves. The audience needs your abstract thoughts to survive. It cannot live in the vibrant, raw reality of a single indrawn breath. This shift from abstract simulation to direct embodiment is the path out of the negotiated captivity we call modern social life. Look at how we move through public spaces. We look at our reflections in shop windows, not to see if our physical body is safe, but to check if the image we are broadcasting is holding its shape. We check our phones every few minutes, looking for digital tokens of validation, a little heart, a thumbs up, a view count. These are the modern currencies of the false self. Every time we receive one, we get a tiny hit of relief, a temporary confirmation that we still exist in the eyes of the matrix. But what happens when the battery dies? What happens when you go into the woods where there is no signal, no audience, no mirrors? Initially, there is a profound withdrawal. The mind feels a deep boredom that is actually a masked anxiety. It feels a sense of weightlessness, as if without the gravity of other people's attention, it might float away into nothingness. But if you stay past that initial discomfort, if you walk through that forest for 2, 3, 4 days without broadcasting your experience to an invisible crowd, a deep integration takes place. The mind stops performing for a phantom lens. You stop looking at the tree to think about how you would describe the tree to someone else. You simply see the tree. You hear the wind through the pines. You feel the damp earth beneath your boots. You return to the unmediated world. The Buddha's teaching on Vongha, or non-self, is often misunderstood as a bleak, nihilistic denial of life. People think it means they must become ghosts, empty of passion, personality, and desire. But the opposite is true. When you realize that the self you have been trying to protect is just a collection of old habits, fears, and social conditioning, you are finally free to be completely alive. You stop treating your life as a monument you are carving out of stone for future generations to admire. You begin to treat it as an improvisational dance, a playful, spontaneous movement that doesn't need to be recorded or approved to have value. Let us explore the practice of non-self journaling more deeply. It is not an exercise in intellectual analysis. It is a way of creating space between the awareness and the contents of the mind. When you write, "I am not my thoughts," you are noticing that thoughts arise by themselves, driven by old conditioning, hunger, fatigue, or random environmental triggers. You do not choose your next thought any more than you choose the next bird that flies past your window. If you do not choose your thoughts, how can they define your worth? When you write, "I am not my image," you are acknowledging that the version of you that exists in the minds of other people is completely out of your control. Your boss has a version of you. Your mother has a version of you. Your ex-partner has a version of you. A stranger on the train has a version of you. These versions are all different, all distorted by their own unique lenses, memories, and biases. None of them are the truth. If you try to manage all these separate versions, you will drive yourself insane. Let them have their versions. Let them build their little cardboard cutouts of you in their heads. It has nothing to do with the living, breathing presence that is sitting here right now. When you write, "I am not myself," you are releasing the need to be consistent with your past mistakes or achievements. The ego wants consistency because consistency feels safe. It says, I am an anxious person, or I am a successful person, or I am a victim of this circumstance. These identities become comfortable cages. Not self-journaling opens the cage door by reminding you that you are a process, a verb, not a noun. You are not an anxious person. You are an awareness within which the energy of anxiety is moving at this moment. This distinction is subtle, but it is the difference between being a prisoner and being the space within which the prison is built. To bring this practice into daily life, we must design small, deliberate experiments in social freedom. Choose one day to wear clothes that do not scream for attention or approval, clothes that are purely functional and comfortable. Walk through the market or the office without trying to catch anyone's eye to see if they are looking at you. When someone speaks to you, listen with your whole body, focusing entirely on their words, their tone, their eyes, rather than preparing your response or monitoring how you look while listening. Notice how much lighter you feel at the end of that day. Your physical energy is no longer being drained by the invisible parasites of self-presentation. Your throat is not sore from forced laughter. Your shoulders are not exhausted from holding a rigid posture of confidence. You have preserved your vital energy, your prana, your inner resource, and you can now use that energy to create, to connect deeply, or simply to rest without guilt. This brings us to the profound relationship between the fear of judgment and our relationship with time. The fear of judgment is entirely a disease of the future and the past. It looks backward to find evidence of past failure or humiliation, and then it projects those memories forward into the next hour, the next week, the next meeting. It turns the future into a minefield of potential embarrassment. The present moment, however, has no room for judgment. If you are entirely focused on the raw, unpolished reality of this second, there is no courtroom. There is only the sound of the clock ticking, the sensation of the breath passing the nostrils, the taste of the tea on the tongue. In the absolute immediacy of direct experience, you are always enough. You do not need to be improved, because there is no standard of comparison available in the absolute now. Comparison requires a memory of what was or an anticipation of what should be. Drop the memory, drop the anticipation, and the scales of judgment vanish instantly. Let us speak honestly about the role of compassion in this work. Compassion is not a soft, sentimental feeling. It is a fierce, clearing energy. When you notice yourself panicking because someone has looked at you with coldness, do not beat yourself up for being fragile. Do not shoot a third arrow into your chest by saying, I should be more enlightened by now. I shouldn't care what they think. This is just the inner critic dressing up in spiritual robes. Instead, look at the scared part of yourself with the immense tenderness of a mother looking at a child who has just had a nightmare. This primitive nervous system of ours has been training for millions of years to fear exile. It is doing its job exactly the way it was designed to do. It is trying to keep you alive. Thank it for its vigilance. Say to your own heart, I see you are terrified right now. I see you feel like you are disappearing. It is okay. I am here. I am not going to leave you. Even if they do, this internal alliance is the ultimate secret of the unowned mind. Most of us are completely abandoned by ourselves the moment the world turns away. When someone criticizes us, we immediately join the critic. We look into the mirror and say, yes, they are right. Look how clumsy you are. Look how stupid you looked in that meeting. We become our own executioners. True spiritual maturity means refusing to join the mob that is attacking you. It means standing with your own direct experience, your own vulnerable heart, especially when the room is cold. If the whole world is pointing its finger at you, your job is to turn inward, wrap your arms around your own shivering soul and say, I am right here. We are going to breathe through this together. When this internal alliance becomes solid, a profound transformation occurs in your external relationships. You stop being a beggar at the table of other people's attention. You no longer need them to smile, applaud, or approve for you to feel safe. And because you don't need anything from them, you can finally see them clearly for who they actually are. You notice that the boss who spoke sharply to you isn't an all-powerful judge who holds your destiny in his hands. He is just a stressed, tired man whose own back hurts, whose own marriage might be failing, who is running away from his own ghosts. You notice that the friend who didn't reply to your message isn't quietly rejecting you. She is simply overwhelmed by her own internal courtrooms, fighting her own invisible battles. The fear of judgment turns into the gift of empathy. You look out through the clear window of your mind, and you don't see critics anymore. You see a world full of wounded performers, all wearing their heavy armor, all terrified of being ordinary, all crying out for a connection that their masks are preventing them from receiving. Let us close this inquiry by returning to the body, where everything begins and ends. Let us do a brief internal inventory right now. Feel the jaw. Is there a tiny clench at the back of the teeth? Let it drop open slightly. Let the lower lip soften. Feel the throat. Is there a sensation of restriction, as if you are holding back a scream, a sob, or a truth? Breathe into that narrow space, letting the air widen it from the inside out. Feel the shoulders. Are they pulled forward to protect the heart or pulled up to bear a burden? Let them drop down heavy toward the earth. Let the shoulder blades slide down the back like melting ice. Feel the chest. Let the sternum soften. Let the belly expand fully on the next inhalation. Without trying to look fit or presentable, let it be soft, round, real. This soft body is your true home. It is not made of glass. It cannot be shattered by an opinion, a review, an algorithm, or a cold look. It is made of earth, water, fire, and air. It has survived every embarrassment, every mistake, every rejection you have ever experienced. It knows how to heal its own wounds if you stop reopening them with the second arrow of your thoughts. When you walk out of this quiet reflection and step back into the noise of the world, remember that you are the sky, not the weather. Let the opinions of others move through you like rain, like thunder, like sudden sunlight, like passing clouds. Enjoy the warmth when it comes, but do not try to build a house out of it. Breathe through the storm when it hits, knowing that no cloud has the power to alter the blue expanse that lies forever untouched behind it. Return the power of seeing yourself to yourself. No one else has the proper credentials for that job. No one else has walked your exact path, felt your exact pain, or carried your exact burdens. Their views are just views, temporary, partial, impermanent. Let the performance end. Let the mask fall away. Let the mirror crack if it must. Step through the frame and become the window that sees the world with absolute clarity, absolute compassion, and absolute freedom. What would your life become if other people's opinions were allowed to pass through you like weather, instead of ruling you like a king?